and welcome to another edition of BU Sports Wired. Cutler, Klein, Max Schneider with you today. Drew Sundaram has the afternoon off. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have a fantastic show for you today, talking about Vanderbilt's rout of Alabama A&M, 42-0 on Saturday, getting into previewing the game against Kansas State this weekend, the first real test for the Commodores, and talking about some realistic expectations going into a gauntlet of a stretch these next few weeks. Alabama, Kansas State, Florida, and Georgia, not necessarily in that order, but those are the teams they are playing. But first, we've got your highlights as Vanderbilt drubbed Alabama A&M over the weekend, 42-0. Let's roll the highlights. Pick it up first quarter here. Kyle Shermer hands off to Ralph Webb, goes into the end zone for a touchdown, says, "You will not touch me today." 7-0 Vanderbilt early on in this one. Next drive, Shermer finds Jared Pinkney, who dives over the goal line. Pinkney slowly becoming a favorite target for Kyle Shermer. Next drive, Shermer from midfield goes all the way towards the end zone. It's Kalijah Lipscomb, the young sophomore, dashes over the goal line. Great effort there from him. And Vanderbilt in the second quarter up 21-0. Strong play there from Vanderbilt. Next drive, Kyle Shermer doesn't have an option, dives for the goal line and gets in. With the determination of John Elway and the grace of Eli Manning, Vanderbilt 28-0 over Alabama A&M. They were all over them, including on special teams. Andrew Rector blocked punt. Picked up there for Vanderbilt, a huge play on special teams. Vanderbilt maybe starting to get that special teams unit going. Second quarter still, Shermer, a wide open Trent Sherfield for yet another score, 35-0. Headed into the half. What a performance from Kyle Shermer just in that first half. Vanderbilt continuing to keep the pressure on, as kept the pressure on the quarterback and intercepted Oren Burks. He has been all over the place, bulked up to play linebacker, but he can still have the hands of a safety. Gets the pick there. Vanderbilt back to the offensive attack, going for Pinkney again, and double coverage, comes down with the ball. That would be all Vanderbilt needed, and they win this one 42-0. Max, what a game that was. What were your overall takeaways from the first two games? Vanderbilt running up the score on their opponents, only giving up 6 points in the first 2 weeks of the season.
I mean, you got to look at the offensive side of the ball. Coming into this season, it was, what can Kyle Shermer do? Can he lead this offense over a tough stretch that we're going to see? And through the first 2 games, he's been excellent. He still has the best QBR in the country. He's thrown for 498 yards, thrown for 7 touchdowns, ran for 1, but most importantly, no interceptions, no turnovers. We've seen how accurate he's been on all levels of passes, with the short game, the medium game, and with the deep ball. He actually leads the nation in most touchdown passes of 20 or more yards. So we've seen him be able to throw the ball down the field. He has that confidence level that Derek Mason really has in him, and he's starting to share that. And even though Kyle Shermer's been great in the passing game, this team's sticking to their bread and butter, and that's the run game. And it might not just be Ralph Webb this year. We're seeing a 3-headed backfield right now with Ralph Webb, Kari Blossomgame, and just this past week, Jamori Wakefield started to insert himself into the equation. He actually led the team in rushing against Alabama A&M. So we're really seeing them stick to their bread and butter, pound the football, use Kyle Shermer both in the play action and in the short passing game, and it's really working wonders for them. I mean, this offense is so dynamic. You saw Jared Pinkney with 2 touchdowns in that highlight. He's becoming a matchup nightmare for defenses. He's becoming the security blanket for Kyle Shermer, and there are just so many weapons on offense, and we're all seeing it come to fruition. Now it's time to test it against the big defenses.
Is there any concern in your mind for the run game? Because on one hand, you've seen these two teams, not necessarily Vanderbilt's best opponents of the year, stack the box successfully against Ralph Webb. He hasn't had over 100 yards. He's barely had over 50 yards through his first 2 games of the season. But on the other hand, it's allowed Kyle Shermer to really open up the offense and go to the air and make those incredible plays. There could also be this aspect of, well, we expect so much out of Ralph Webb that a couple of 50-yard games would ring a bell in people's minds as a cause for concern. Do you think there is that concern there that Vanderbilt can't get this running game going?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of concern, and a lot of that stems from the fact that we have a new right side of this offensive line here in Nashville. I mean, Devin Cochran at right tackle, he's replacing Schooley, who just moved over to the left side, and Jared Southers at right guard. So a lot of these plays that are running right, it's unfamiliar territory for Ralph Webb. And I think what you're seeing to combat that is a little more power run with Blossomgame, Blossomgame doesn't really count on his blocks as much. He's more a straight-ahead runner, whereas Webb's a little more like Le'Veon Bell. He'll pick his blocks. He'll hit the holes hard. So I think what they're doing to combat that is just using 3 running backs, not just going to pound it in with Webb on every down. So I think there's a little bit of concern, but as this offensive line starts to gel together, the running game could pick up. And they're still counting on Webb. They're not going to give him any fewer carries.
This could be a big year for Kerry Blossomgame as well, who we saw in the Alabama A&M game just truck some people. I mean, he carried players 5 or 6 yards, full Mark Bavaro style in some way for Kerry Blossomgame. Other side of the ball, the defense, the concern going into the offseason was how are they going to deal with losing Adam Butler? How are they going to deal with losing Zach Cunningham on that defense? Both now NFL talents. Is this defense way better than we expected them to be early on in the season? Because they seem to have gotten after quarterbacks. They've already gotten more sacks through the first 2 games than they did almost all of last season. 8 sacks so far. They had 15 last season. So that's pretty remarkable for this defense.
Yeah, this defense looks like it hasn't missed a step at all, and that's something that wasn't expected coming into the season. Of course, you lose a top talent like Zach Cunningham, who, by the way, shout out to Zach Cunningham. He's about to get that starting job in Houston. Brian Cushing down for 10 games with PED charge. So Zach Cunningham's been excellent in Houston. He's about to get the job. But back to Vanderbilt, when you lose a guy with that much talent, you expect there to be a drop-off. And right now, we haven't seen that drop-off at all. Oren Burks has filled in absolutely wonderfully. He's in the backfield constantly. Charles Wright's filled into his role, and he's pressured the quarterback on down after down. He had 2.5 sacks in that first game, was in the backfield a ton the next game. So you're really seeing this pressure on the quarterback, and Oren Burks has filled in for Zach Cunningham. So there's not that drop-off that you would have expected, and 6 points through 2 games, I mean, the score says it all.
Burks just looks like a new human being out there on the field. He's huge now. He's got a big body, but he also has that speed and the hands and agility that made him such a good player in the secondary, now playing a little closer to the front and linebacker. Really strong game from him. Now moving on from that strong victory over Alabama A&M to this upcoming week's game against the Kansas State Wildcats, number 18 in the country. A statement game potentially for Vanderbilt going up against a ranked opponent that I think Vanderbilt stacks up well against. This is a team that likes to run the ball well, has a mobile quarterback that can really make plays downfield. They have a great core of wide receivers. But as we've seen Vanderbilt time and time again, going up against shifty running quarterbacks, Shea Patterson, Josh Dobbs, Brent Stockstill, none of them had particularly good games against Vanderbilt in the last year or so. What makes Vanderbilt have a chance in this matchup? What gives them a chance to actually win this game and maybe turn some more heads nationally?
I mean, you said it. It's a perfect matchup for them when you talk about style of play. The quarterbacks that gave this team trouble last year, guys like Mike White from Western Kentucky, guys who stand in the pocket and deliver the football, and they can take the pressure, they can take the hit, and they'll deliver the ball downfield accurately. Jesse Ertz isn't that kind of quarterback. He's more of a shifty. I liken him a little to Alex Smith, who runs a little bit more. I mean, they'll call a bunch of designed run plays for him, but he's not going to beat you with speed. He's a smart runner, but he's not super athletic in the ground game. But he'll run, and that's what Vanderbilt does well. They stop running quarterbacks. This defense is fast. If anything, they're lightning quick. When you talk about guys like Oren Burks and Charles Wright on the outside, Emmanuel Smith, these linebackers get to the quarterback, and they're not going to be beat on the edge. So when you talk about a quarterback like Jesse Ertz, he's not going to be able to do what he does best necessarily. And you might have to relegate him to the passing game, which really isn't their forte. I mean, he was excellent in the first game of the season, but Kansas State predominantly is a run-based team. They only threw the ball 16 times and scored 55 points. So their offense is entirely based in the ground game, and there's no real one back for them. They like to share the wealth. Alex Barnes is the main guy in that backfield, but they don't have one guy who's really going to dominate Vanderbilt, and this defense is so fast that they'll be able to keep up with the guys who continue to switch in and out of this game, particularly quarterback Jesse Ertz, who does like to run the football a lot.
On the opposite side of the ball, they have a really stellar secondary, and that could give Kyle Shermer a little bit of trouble, especially if they are able to stuff the run and then force Kyle Shermer into throwing and make them beat this talented secondary. Do you think this defense could give Vanderbilt a little bit of trouble, and do you think that they're going to finally make the move? We've seen teams stack the box. Are they going to finally make the move to try and back off a little bit and try and almost force Vanderbilt to beat them on the run game, which if we said that last year would have been a crazy approach to this Vanderbilt offense.
Right. I still think they'll tend to stack the box a little more, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, is despite losing their own superstar, Jordan Willis, who led the Big 12 in sacks last year, they have another pass rusher on the other side, and that's Reggie Walker. And he's been excellent all season for them, all of last season. He can really pressure the quarterback. And then in the secondary, they have a legitimate shutdown corner in DJ Reed. He's only a sophomore, but you'll see him on both sides of the ball. And in the return game this weekend, he's lightning fast. He can guard Trent Sherfield one-on-one or any receiver they really pin him up against. So they don't really need to get that over-the-top help when they have a shutdown corner like DJ Reed. So we'll see a lot of pressure on the quarterback. Vanderbilt's offensive line, especially from the left side, which is where Walker usually lines up, has been excellent. Justin Schooley's been great through the first 2 games. So we'll see if that's going to really be the crux of this game at the line of scrimmage. Can Vanderbilt win the line of scrimmage, and can Kyle Schirmer have a pocket to pass in? Because if he does, he'll be able to pick apart this defense that's really headlined by DJ Reed on one side. So it's all about holding that line of scrimmage and giving Kyle Schirmer a chance.
See, what I'm looking at with this game is you see offenses that line up well against defenses and vice versa for these teams. So what does that leave? That leaves special teams. Vanderbilt it's been a slow buildup for their special teams over the last year or so. Tommy Openshaw can hit field goals. He hasn't a lot in this season. He missed a 50-plus yarder against Alabama A&M. That was kind of just, all right, we'll take a shot in the dark here and see if it works. That's the kind of thing where Vanderbilt could excel in this game and could win on that special teams, because I think this game could easily be decided by a field goal. It could be tied in the fourth quarter. Vanderbilt marches downfield, gets a field goal kick to win it, and that's where Tommy Openshaw really needs to come through. I think that's also where Sam Loy at punter, who has done an outstanding job so far this season, can pin this offense deep and let this front 7 for Vanderbilt make Jesse Ertz have some nightmares about facing this team. Do you think special teams is what it's going to come down to? Because I think if you see these teams, they're evenly matched otherwise, and Vanderbilt in the special teams game, that's what could put them over the top. Special teams can't necessarily win you a game, but it can lose you a game, and that's where I think it could come into play here.
Right, and I think this figures to be a low-scoring contest. I mean, both of these teams have put up a ton of points in their first 2 games, albeit against lesser opponents. So these are 2 great defenses going up against each other, and this figures to be a low-scoring game. So when you look at that, a lot of times field position can determine this game. And like you said, Sam Loy, kind of rugby-style punter, if he can get some of those punts to roll down inside the 10, give Vanderbilt a chance to really put pressure on Kansas State deep in their own territory, this could become a battle of field position. But I think when you talk about the special teams game, Kansas State really has the edge here, and that's because of DJ Reed, like I've been talking about. He's an excellent return man. If you give him room, he can and he will take it to the house against you. He just has so much speed, is so shifty. He's just only 5'9", but is able to evade these tacklers. And if you give him a chance, he might take it to the house. So look for Tommy Openshaw to try to kick it out of the end zone. They tried Riley Guay in the kicking game last week. That might be the way to go. Just really neutralize this return game, because that's the aspect of special teams where Kansas State really holds the edge.
If Vanderbilt is able to win, how much do you think they can win by? And do you think you could put a percentage chance on how likely it is that Vanderbilt could win this game?
I mean, I think this will be a close game either way. I don't see either team blowing each other out. Right now, Vegas has the line at +4, and Vegas gives Vandy a chance, and you really should too. I'd give them about a 50% chance of winning this game. I think it can go either way. I think home field advantage is huge in this game. Kansas State hasn't been here in a while, this being the Big 12 SEC Challenge game. So I think they're going into unfamiliar territory. And Bill Schneider, Kansas State's coach, is not taking this game lightly. He said in his press conference, Vanderbilt's a team that won 6 games, but easily could have won 11 last year. 5 losses by only 1 score. So they're not taking this game lightly. Vanderbilt's not taking this game lightly. I think this is a toss-up.
It certainly should be 6:30 p.m. Central this Saturday. ESPNU on TV, but if you're a student, get that free ticket. Get out to the game. It should be an incredibly fun atmosphere and a beautiful night for football in Nashville. But this is going to be the first of many tough games for Vanderbilt going into this season. This begins a 4-game stretch of incredibly tough opponents, ranked opponents. After this game, it's Alabama, the best team in the country and the world, coming to Nashville. Then on the road against the Gators in Gainesville, Florida. And then the last week of this 4-game harrowing stretch, Georgia at home for Vanderbilt's homecoming. So this is a stretch of games in which Vanderbilt is not going to be favored by any margin against any of these 4 teams. what do you think is the best case scenario for Vanderbilt to get out of this? Because I feel like realistically, if they get 2 wins out of that 4-game stretch, then they are in golden shape to not just get to a bowl game, but to potentially contend in the SEC East.
Right. I think 2 games has to be the goal here, but I really think 3 games is the best case scenario. And we'll see really with this Kansas State game. I think this will be the benchmark. I don't see a win against Alabama. But if you look at this Kansas State game, they're a very SEC-style team. They're a kind of ground-and-pound offense. They like to run some trick plays on offense, but mostly grounded in the running game. They have a running quarterback, and they have a stout defense. It's going to be a very similar matchup to teams they'll face down the road. So if they can pull off this win this week, I see no reason why they can't beat Georgia and Florida down the road. Florida's a team that really, they don't know what they're doing at quarterback. They have 3 quarterbacks, and as we all know, if you have 3 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. And so we're not seeing the offensive firepower from Florida, and really Georgia either. Georgia had an impressive win over Notre Dame, but we really haven't seen that offense flourish yet. So I don't think Vanderbilt has anything to fear going down this stretch. And if they can beat Kansas State, there's no reason why they can't go 3-1.
Yeah, I'd certainly think at least 3 of those 4 games are winnable, the one unwinnable one being Alabama. The way I put it is if Vanderbilt beats Alabama next week, it would be the biggest win in school history, which includes a future national championship win. That's how big of a win this would be for Vanderbilt if they could somehow pull off the miracle of all miracles and beat Alabama. So I think also 3 wins. They're certainly not out of it in any of those games. If you had to pick 2 that they are probably have the best shot at winning in, which ones would you pick?
I'd go this week at with Kansas State, and then probably looking down the road against Georgia. And I say that mostly because these are 2 home games, and Vanderbilt's really been excellent at home over the past 2 years. A lot of struggles on the road. And we saw those struggles last year. They looked excellent against Middle Tennessee on the road week 1, but that's not the same caliber team as an SEC matchup like Florida. Going to Florida, that team's going to be energized. You have to believe by then they'll have started to figure out this offense a little bit. They're getting a couple of these guys back. So if there's any game out of those 3, excluding the Alabama game, that we think they're going to lose, I'd say Florida. And I think they have a good shot at Georgia, and they have a good shot at Kansas State, mostly because those 2 games are at home. Georgia's the homecoming game. Georgia's still figuring some things out at quarterback with Eason and Fromm. So those are 2 very winnable games. We saw them knock off Georgia last year, and then this week at Kansas State, of course, a winnable game for them.
I would have to say Kansas State and probably Florida are the most winnable for Vanderbilt because with Florida, it's always close between the Commodores and the Gators. It's never any kind of shootout. It's never any kind of blowout. It's always a 10 to 20 point slugfest between these 2 teams. No matter how good, no matter how bad these teams are, no matter where the game is played, it always seems to be close between these 2 teams. So that's one big thing to look out for. A huge 4-game stretch for the Commodores coming out. Make sure you go out and support the team because they absolutely deserve it. With that, that'll just about do it for this week's episode of VU Sports Wired. Thank you so much for tuning in. I've been Cutler Klein. He's been Max Schneider. So long, and we will see you next time.